Hello, dear ones. Welcome to another conversation on the different shades and shapes of love. The kind of conversation I think we must have more of. As always, before we start, can I invite you to take a moment of centering and breathing with me so that we can pause together. Sit down with your back up. Drop your shoulders. Relax. Close your eyes. Breathe. Inhale deeply. Exhale slowly. Inhale deeply. Exhale slowly. Inhale deeply. Exhale slowly. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. And now listen with your heart. Today's shade of love is Thrive. Thrive was the love I received from my return to the corporate sector in September 2008 as a regional managing director with a UK-listed group. I surprised myself when I confidently and honestly shared with the hiring manager my personal pledge of living my life in 3 clear thirds. 1/3 self-development, 1/3 service to humanity, and 1/3 work to pay the bills. I was hired with an attractive package and a work arrangement that suited all my commitments. It is strange how we instinctively stand taller when we have something valuable to offer to the society. There was a strong sense of familiarity as I donned my pencil skirts and heels again. It was a rewarding comeback for me, both professionally and financially. Although I thrive and revel in this second corporate win, I knew I was no longer the same Anthea when I turned down 2 offers to sprint up the corporate ladder. A phone call to the group CEO in London to quiz him on our corporate responsibility strategy in Asia put me on the global responsibility board as the Asian lead. In those 5.5 years with the firm, I also completed my certifications as a yoga instructor, a microfinance trainer, and a Reiki practitioner, on top of starting several community projects and volunteering actively with numerous non-profit organizations. With the debt settled, the bank balance on the rise, and my spirit soaring, I was filling up again. I was back, better than before. So coming out of the lowest point in my life, and I think experiencing the first glimpses of thriving made me think of the olive trees to pair this shade with when I wrote the chapter. Even in the most arid and harshest of conditions, olive trees will produce loads of fruits. They thrive where others wilt and then go on to flourish for century after century. I also shared in the book the story of the al-Badawi tree, which is believed by the people of Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, to be 4,000 to 5,000 years old. And it still produces the world's finest olive oil and largest known olive fruits every fall. Olive trees are said to be the earth's most generous and appreciated providers. I aspire to flourish like the olive tree and be generous with my offer to the world. When I was thinking of who I would like to have a conversation with on this shade of love, more than a few leaders I know came to mind. Yet I don't think we can talk about thriving without discussing the climate and mental health crisis that we are facing and unpacking the responsibility and purpose of leadership. So my friend Stephane de Montlivault came to mind. Stephane is French, but has not lived in France for 2/3 of his life. He now lives in Singapore with his Singaporean wife, Ivy, daughter, Aimee, and son, Alban. He shared with me how he constantly craves to expand his purpose in life through and beyond family and career. And we both share a deep conviction in championing workplace mental well-being as a leadership priority at the WorkWell Leaders community of CEOs and leaders that I started 3 years ago. Stephane is also the Asia Pacific President of OTIS. Yes, the elevator company. That's 167 years old, I believe, which was founded and is listed in New York. So, Stephane, let me formally say hello to you and thank you so much for bravely saying yes to being part of this podcast experiment to discuss love and to call on love more as we look at the issues of our time. Welcome, Stephane.
Well, thank you, Antea. Thanks for having me with you, and really happy to engage in that conversation with you.
Thank you. You're very brave, actually, to say yes to me. But in any case, as I was sharing, I felt like, it's interesting how after such a setback and a collapse, as much as I was backed into a world that I was very familiar with, I was also no longer feeling the same way as I did in the past when I was in the corporate sector. I think a big difference for me was before making an income, having a job was to make an income, and that took center stage, right? Or the entire stage, maybe even. But I also wonder, when we pause and ask ourselves, don't you think it's really funny that we actually say we make a living when we actually, go to work, when actually for all the hours we spend on this, we would hardly be called living. Well, I mean, as you know as well, that the fact that I almost contemplated ending my life at the lowest point, I definitely was very determined now to make a living of my life, right? And that was why I talked about the 3/3, 1/3 to income generating activities to pay the bill, and 1/3 for self-development, and 1/3 for service to humanity. So I think in some ways I would like to, just add on that I think that became a bit of a period of renaissance for me,
right.
Of a revival of sorts. But I also distinctively remember the joy and the awe of realizing that I can thrive in balance. Does that make sense? Like, for the longest time, we were told, if you want to thrive and you want to succeed, then you got to spend all your time in this thing, right? But then when I started to break things down, break my life at least, not my life, but maybe my aspirations into 3/3, and realizing that, hey, I could still thrive, and I was feeling really balanced. Whether it was about hugging trees or painting or singing or giving or living, that it did not need to be mutually exclusive, right, to this identity of a corporate leader. So what I would like to ask of you is to share, your personal story, because I now know how the chasing of this identity in the work we do, in the job that we are paid to do, it's not the only way to feel that self-worth, to have, that sense of belonging, of place. In fact, I would say I now know that what I give out actually comes back to me to affirm my existence and my worth. And I thrive when others thrive, and vice versa. And I also feel like it's so important for us to take care of our mental well-being in our relationships with each other and the planet. And then this is a virtuous cycle, right? That we actually probably should really be talking more about with our children. What's your personal story with falling and thriving, and then thriving and living? Yeah, I would love for the listeners to also hear from you. What's your story?
So thanks, Antea. And first, I have to say that my journey has been very different. The way I found my ground for thriving has been actually consistently keeping in the track of my entire career with one single company.
And that's true, yes.
And in doing that, also I've had to find my way of creating junctions of making a living, because I did have to make my living out of my work, like everybody has to, but also utilizing that ground, that work ground, for also finding purposes through my work. I've always looked at work as one essential pillar amongst a few other pillars that are needed to have emotional balance and a personal well-being. And for me, it's been maybe a bigger pillar than for others. Obviously, I've put so much investment and to a certain extent dependence on my work for a large part of my life, particularly before I started to build a family, which happened fairly late in my life, in my mid-40s. I've had a significant part of my life that was very relying on my job, and I actually followed my job geographically, and that's
why you haven't been back in France.
And that's why I haven't been back in France, and that really shaped me as a person.
Yeah. How so? Let's talk a little bit about this part, about how you followed your job with the same company, but the company did give you opportunities to sort of almost explore the world, like you said, right? You were following the company geographically, and that has actually shaped you. How would you say that has shaped you?
Well, it's shaped me in many ways, but maybe if I can rewind back to my childhood.
Yes,
you know,
please,
I grew up in a small village, French countryside, and it wasn't until I reached my teens that I actually went and lived in a city to follow school, and then eventually, when I was 22 years old, left France to pursue my studies and start a career with OTIS. And so, living in a village, in a very safe, secure place, socially, to come to the point of moving out of my country, breaking my comfort zone. And actually, when I left France to the US, it was the first time I was leaving my country, and really made me discover myself in a much wider context. And so from that time, going to the US and then later to Asia, nothing really unfolded in a planned manner. And it all unfolded as a combination of opportunities that came to me through my company, but also keeping myself really open and listening to my curiosity, my desire for always discovering and being exposed to more than I was before. And so that really made me, from being really a true French child to being a grown-up adult with experience of many different cultures. And I always define myself now a little bit as a, 1/3 European, 1/3 American, 1/3 Asian.
You're really, truly a global citizen.
I guess I may fall into that category, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's really. I really like what you talked about. In the curiosity, right? How you have actually brought curiosity when opportunities are presented to you. Because as much as you may have been given the opportunities by the company, right? If without the curiosity, your journey would have been very different, obviously. And who you are today would have been very different. Would you not say that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
An example of that is when I completed my graduate school in the US, my intention was actually to start working for a couple of years, acquiring that first job experience in America before going back to France. And as I started making plans to return to France, after 5 years working in the US, which was already longer than I ever thought would be, a call came and with an opportunity from somebody based in Singapore to consider a job in Asia Pacific. And my first reaction was, well, there's no chance. I've already made my decisions. I need to go back home. I've been in the US for 8 years now, and
right.
It's time for me to go home and get a job in France and eventually get married. And but after insistence from that OTIS colleague calling me from halfway around the world, and also thinking about it a little more, I thought, well, why not at least giving a chance to have a discussion and go there for a couple of days and make my decision. And that's what I did. And it was clear to me with the sheer amazement of discovering this part of the world, which was totally unknown to me, that there was only more to win in my experience to postpone my return back to France for another 2-3 years. That was in 1989, and here we are now in 2021, and I am in Singapore with a Singaporean wife and my 2 kids who were born in Hong Kong and grew up most of their life in Japan. And so that's how I define my global citizenship. And it did start out of my own curiosity to discover Asia and to be exposed to this part of the world.
That's a great story, right? I'm sure your kids would find that fascinating, but definitely to share with your grandchildren too, right? How they all come about, how this all come about, just from that, that seed of curiosity that you had planted, and how that has unfolded into this, wonderful life and the person that you are. You mentioned your childhood briefly, about how, you were born and raised, I guess, right, in the countryside. How would you say your childhood has shaped you? Or what about your childhood do you think has shaped you to be the leader that you are today?
The growing up in a countryside, in a small village, in the years that I did, meant to be subjected to very, very clear values, values that we were brought by my family, but not just my family. We're brought by this environment. The fact of living in a small place,
community.
In a community, makes you obligated to follow a certain value system, which can't be escaped. If you live in a big city, you can be many kind of a person and get away with it. But in a village, there's no place to hide. And
that perspective.
You have to be following the way things are done in that place, and that's really shaped me as a person. And the good thing is a lot of the ways things are done in a small village in France back then in the early 60s was a beautiful way of life, and from a quality of life perspective, but also from a human perspective. And I learned a lot of life lessons growing up in the countryside, developing my own resources of understanding nature, but also, and importantly, being exposed to simple life. And sometimes not easy life through other people who were my neighbors, my school friends, and those people that were in my environment.
No, that's so important, right? That's a different perspective to bring in instead of thinking about how the environment that we bring our children up really shape the values that And in your case, most people would say, oh, okay, so the countryside, right? And when you said about, oh, you got to do things in a certain way, right? Because you can't hide, you can't get away.
Right.
And that's inculcated in you a certain set of values. And like you said, thankfully, those set of values were really good ones, right? They were both,
right.
They were very sort of human-centered.
Right. It has its other effects as well.
Of course. And what would you say?
So if you look at growing up in a small place and living in a place with limited diversity, in a village, everybody has very common, well-defined references, fairly limited, it develops a very protective community culture, where what comes from outside is viewed as either dangerous or sometimes negative, or at the least misunderstood. And so, while I did develop all these very solid, strong values that are still with me today, that start in life was in a way also difficult because it created a lot of prejudices in the way I viewed other people and judged other people who were not, let's say, from my village. Yeah. And so when I started discovering the wider world, I was confronted with a diversity that brought a new dimension of life to me. And it was quite brutal at the beginning.
I was going to ask you, that must have been jarring. Right.
Very much so. Yeah. Very much so. And
how did you work with that? How did you support yourself to?
I had the first year. I went to school in a city that was in Lyon, the second largest city in France. Right off my village to that city, I actually had a very difficult year. I was a good student in my school years, and on that year, I was 13 years old. I was 2 years in advance on my school curricular. But that year showed as extremely difficult because I had to find my place in this new world, and it was not easy. I had to integrate a group of other school children who were brought up in a very different way, who were much smarter than me in a city environment. My smartness was acquired in a countryside environment, and so that meant that I was a little bit alienated from my peers, this new school community. Sometimes a little bit bullied, and in fact it was a difficult year because as a result of this difficult integration, I actually had a terrible year from a scholar point of view.
Okay,
it was not a good year.
The grades were not good.
The grades were not good. Where I was always spaced to be, in the top group of my class. That year ended up to be a failure. I had to double that year, and it was a difficult transition to my childhood village life to the wider world. That's caused me a lot of reflection, but it also started a little bit of my transformation.
Great. So I want to actually take that, right? Because the world that we are today, we are talking a lot about diversity and inclusion. And as you were saying about how coming from a small village in the countryside, obviously there was some, I wouldn't say prescribed, but there was a certain set of value. There's a certain value system that you hold so dearly, and that when you are opening yourself up, right, to a much bigger world, the differerences were jarring. As you said, it was brutal. So it's really, the pressing issues of our time, even as we speak, right? In a different context, but what you shared is also what we are kind of also experiencing right now in Singapore, right? Singapore, obviously, as a country, is a small country. And as much as we are also very open, as an economy, as a society. We are constantly having to understand, integrate, accept, the different cultures, not just even from outside of Singapore, but even within Singapore. There's also that need to start having this kind of conversation that you've actually just shared with us, right? The challenges that come with it, but also the good things that come with it. You talked about the value system, that those ground you and that those still make you who you are at the core. But at the same time, there's a level of, it sounds like there's a level of openness, curiosity, but also going through lots of challenges of being marginalized, prejudiced, failure, struggle, and all of that. Yeah. Right. How has that, you think, make you the leader that you are today, especially since you are a leader of a very large work community, in a place like Singapore and Asia? Well, you look after Asia Pacific. How has it helped shape the way you look at diversity and inclusion?
Well, so let me come back to that, because I think an important point for me to shape the personality that became my leadership, my leadership traits in my working life. I had to make that transformations from being that village boy to being more of a city person, and eventually more of a world citizen. And there was a very important transition into that transformation, and that occurred when I went to do my military service in France. So remember, I was in that village and really used and comfortable with dealing with people that really behaved like me and had the same value references as me, and right. And I unconsciously was very judgmental, on what I had learned was good for me and by my own experience, and I needed somehow to become conscious of that and rid of all these prejudice and biases that had built over during my childhood. It happened by chance when I joined the army, because I joined an environment where we find ourselves all facing quite a difficult first 2 months, where we are really being tested on our physical endurance, emotional endurance, and in an environment where we're actually all wearing a same uniform. It's difficult to make any difference from one to the other, by judging on appearances. It's also situations where we found ourselves all together, not by choice, but really, put together, living for 2 months, sleeping in the same room with, dormitory with 12 people, and these people really would have never come to be with you for this extended period of time unless, it was imposed to you. Yeah. And what I learned during my military time is, to my surprise, I found out that the diversity of these people, the places and environment they were coming from were so different from mine, and yet I was able to tie so genuine friendships with them, and it really taught me that with all the goodness of that childhood life and all the strong values that I could acquire during then, I was able to open up myself to the fact that the world is made of so many more kinds of people, and I could break through this narrow view of the world that I had acquired. So when I later found myself in different countries and different cultures, it invariably come to the fact that we need to break the surface and look at the core and be able to look at people as human beings, as opposed to looking at people of a certain nationality or of a certain race or from a certain place versus another one.
No, that's really powerful. I think I would like to come back to what you talk about in terms of value, right? Because I think I resonate so much with that, because I feel so strongly now that it's more about the values that I want to live by and be remembered by than the value that I extract from the world, which I want to be, honest, when I was actually young and making the chase and having that be the center stage of my focus. Now thinking back, I was extracting value from the world, right? So I think because I want to now live by my values, it's also why I started Harsh Tiba, right? Whom you just met, one of our teammates, Gotwa. I was very clear I wanted to produce so that I can employ and empower, right? And this means my friends from the deaf community and people who live with mental health experience. So my whole intent of setting up Harsh, I remember very clearly because I think I was quite jolted by it because I had obviously started up other commercial businesses before and also ran, MNC businesses where it was always more about I employ so that I can produce. But with Harsh, I was really so clear, right? I'm producing so I can employ, and in employing, I can empower. So can we maybe, so coming from the values you talk about and the difference between knowing your values as well as the value you're extracting from others. Let's talk about this idea of economic growth and thriving in balance, right? Which I know actually we both feel strongly about. I think for a while now, I do feel that we have been extractive at so many levels, whether it's human resources that we may have been extracting, which, as you and I know, can translate into major source of stress and mental ills, right? For our employees, our work communities, or obviously the way we extract from planetary resources, right? That clearly has caused the climate crisis, and we have been extracting that for economic growth. So we are both part of WorkWell Leaders, which is looking to change the narrative of leadership from one of seeing employees as resources to one as humans, as you said, right? To look at people around us, whether they are within our work community or outside of that, as humans, and also with humans with infinite potential, right? And talents, and that it's our responsibility in our privileged position as leaders to help them thrive at all levels. So we are also both vocal champions of sustainability, and OTIS is a company that believes much in that. I'm obviously a loud and proud tree hugger and troublemaker in Parliament also in this issue, and you in your role with your organization, the one that you lead. How can we, Stephane, so I'm bringing us up and zooming out a little bit, how can we turn economies and organizations that need to grow, whether or not they make us thrive as humans, to that which makes us thrive, whether they grow or not, right? So how do you think, it might not be this binary, but I'm going to put it out to you, right? Right now, clearly, the way economies and organizations are, to a large extent, there is that need to grow, regardless of whether the humans are thriving. How do we turn it around so that the humans are thriving, whether the economies or organizations are growing? What are your views on that?
So obviously this insane economic pursuit of corporations will have to find its balance. As we all know, sustainability is going to become more and more conditions of surviving in this world in a way that can be taken over by the generations after us. For a company, it starts with looking at the organization not as a child, but as a community. And you said it. And so for every leader to start looking at the economic chart through its people, that means really looking at performance through people as opposed to as looking at people through results is to me an essential aspect of making a company purposeful and sustainable on its own. But the other aspects is how this company become purposeful in its environment. How does it give back and contribute to a perennial economic system?
Yeah,
I think today more and more the realization is coming in that we not only see the effect having a sustainable approach company have on the outside, but we also see the effect it has on their own success. It's clear to me that to be successful, the company now has to be managed with purpose from the standpoint of its own community, but also from its surrounding communities.
And I think that's really important, right? We are now no longer building just profitable companies, but purposeful companies and organizations. And therefore, the role of a leader is so critical because you are going to actually be, as a leader, and all of us who are leaders, we are going to be having to take this march forward. But before we take this much forward, what is the change that we need to make of ourselves at an individual level so that what we bring to the organization that we're leading towards a purpose is also aligned to who we are as humans, right? So how would you say the work? So Gandhi said this, be the change that you want to see in the world. And I think that's even more important for a leader to take that to heart, because how you change yourself does not just impact the immediate group of people around you, but because of the position of influence that you have. You are talking about, a large community, and sometimes the impact could be even at the national level and beyond at the global level. So what do you think should be the work that we need to do as leaders, right? In leading our organizations and our work communities toward one that's purposeful and not merely profitable?
Well, so first of all, I think we need to be complete leaders. I think we too often have a tendency to categorize or stereotype leadership in ways that compares, and I too often hear that, are you a performance-driven leader or are you a purpose-driven leader?
And some model out there that,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I refute this. To me, it's not a or. It has to be an and.
Exactly.
You have to be leading with purpose to generate performance, and so it is. I've used that as undissociable, and it starts with leadership attitude, with the leadership example that you carry from the top and that you exemplify with your teams and the whole organization. Yeah. That's also the foundations of creating trust and adherence to the value and the direction that you set for the company. And so purpose starts with leadership attitude, but then extends to a much bigger dimension as you set and influence direction at corporate level and any business unit level. It is part of the leader's role to create corporate purpose, and there are obviously many directions that can be taken. And when you talk about sustainability, it's as much about how we contribute to the climate change issue as it is to how we contribute to the societies and the communities that we operate in.
Exactly. And I think that's very important. It's not an or, it's an and, both and, right? That we are actually going to have to shift our narrative and not try to be binary about the way we look at how we bring ourselves forward. I really want to make sure we reinforce what you said. It's not about, what model of leader that you should be, but to be whole and to be complete. First as a human, and then that you bring to, who you are as a leader. And I think that we know shape the culture of the organization that we lead, and therefore it works us towards the purpose and the purpose, of course, must include performance, because that's also a role that we are playing for society and for the employees that are part of our team. So I would like to now ask you to sort of share as we wrap up, right? What do you think? Maybe I'll share this first, right? We're both working with the WorkWell Leaders. I think beyond just sort of sustainability and beyond sort of looking after our work communities and looking at them all as humans, there's also that huge contribution that we make to society, because we have all these resources in a rather organized manner, to be able to sort of bring the society forward. And so the role we play it's not merely through just the corporate social responsibility team. It's where I'm going to, right? It's not just a CSR department's responsibility, but it's the entire organization, because every employee is a member of society. When we look after our employees in terms of their mental well-being, or also the needs that they have beyond their work needs, when we see and support them in different aspects of their life, in the roles they play, that not only support them, obviously, to be happier at work, but it makes them, happier members of society. And that's, I think personally, it's a big contribution we are making as leaders and as well as organizations, because of just the resources and the influence that we have. And I know for a fact that, when we also as organizations and leaders look at how do we bring meaningfulness, to our employees, that translates to better mental health outcomes too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say in terms of how you feel about this really important role that we play as employers, as leaders, and I think to a large extent maybe as a private sector, right? Because very often we look at, the work of contributing to society, let's leave it to the public sector and the people sector. But the private sector, the fact that so many of members of society work, right, also with an employer, that's such an opportunity for us to contribute that way too.
Yeah, it is, Anthea. And I think the responsibility is on us, employers and leaders, to create that purpose at individual level, but also driven at the dimension of the whole corporation. You mentioned corporate social responsibility agendas, and I'll give you one example of something we do to bring our organization to some very strong common purpose. We've launched a program called Made to Move Your Communities. And through this program, we bring together the opportunity to develop youth STEM education and encourage young students to work on projects to improve inclusive mobility. And so we've engaged schools all around the world and engaged the students in competitions to come up with ideas that can improve mobility particularly for those communities that have less access. And we engage our employees to lead these projects and to be the coach of these students, and it all ends up into a global competition where we reward the best projects and the best students and the schools that come up with the best ideas.
Thank you for doing that. And I think it's because of that which actually motivated me to start A Good Space. And the idea behind A Good Space really was to bring, change makers in the community, right, who are doing such amazing work. And then instead of getting the companies to come out to the communities, we bring the communities into this work environments, this employee communities, and to hopefully in that create a change-making culture, very much like what you're doing. But we are looking to make every employee a change maker, and that every employee in their own right, with their own ability and resources, supported by an organization that is working towards their purpose to support them as well, would be able to be a change maker and to be a part of that solution that we are trying to look at for the world's problems that we're trying to solve. And I think that's really exciting, and same with what we're trying to do with WorkWell. Of course, that one we're working through the leaders like yourself. So thank you so much, Stephane. This was such a, we went from sort of childhood and, looking at diversity and inclusion to looking at sustainability and being being a steward, both as leaders as well as organization, and understanding the part we play also, not just for ourselves or the organization we lead, but our employees, and then how that also impacts the planet. So what would you say would be a key takeaway for you in this conversation we just had before we wrap up? What comes up for you?
Well, for me, I think what comes up is the importance of that everyone can play, using corporate ground as a platform to better society, to address sustainability issues, to engage in a significant and substantial way people through that work platform, and encourage them, to act beyond that corporate environment into their own communities. And so this is a converging point that to me is must be used as an opportunity to act responsibly and be a founder of sustainability, starting from the corporate world.
Thank you for that. That's really wise words that you've shared, especially as a corporate leader. I would also add on that for me, this conversation really brings home, this statement that I hold very close to my heart from Spider-Man. But I think, that being in a leadership position is a privilege. And with that privilege comes responsibility and opportunity. And I would like to bring your curiosity. So with that privilege and that opportunity that we have as leaders to bring curiosity, which means the change we want to make of ourselves, as well as the change we want to make with others in our midst, sometimes under our care. And in that, we'll also make the change for the world. Thank you so much, Stephane. So in relation to the topics we discussed in this conversation, and as with every conversation that we have had, we always share a bit of resources, for you listeners out there who might want to find out more. These resources I'm going to share are obviously not exhaustive. You can find some of the links on our show notes and social media posts. We mentioned WorkWell Leaders a few times. Both Stephane and I obviously are very vested in that. So check us out. We are a community of CEOs and leaders championing workplace mental well-being as a strategic priority. I mentioned A Good Space. So full disclosure, I am a founder and I'm the chairperson for that. There's also the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center's Company of Good program that you can find out more about how you can participate as an organization or as leaders. If you want to support in terms of financial resources, there's also Community Foundation of Singapore and the Community Chest of Singapore. And where sustainability is concerned, to get involved as organizations, as leaders, the list is so long, but I will encourage all of you to go out there. There's the Forum of the Future. There's the Lights of Climate Conversations. So yeah, the list is just too long for me to put out here, but do come forward to play a part. And before we wrap up this conversation, I would like to leave you, as always, with an invitation. And these are the invitations also from the book. What do people thank you for? What can you give yourself more credit for?